Imagine buying a pickup truck because you need ground clearance, suspension travel, a useful bed, the ability to tow something heavy, and enough toughness to deal with roads that occasionally stop behaving like roads. Then imagine taking that same truck home and immediately lowering it 4 inches toward the ground. That sounds ridiculous when I say it like that, right? But thousands of pickup owners do exactly this every year. And sometimes the result looks incredible. Other times, they accidentally remove half the reasons the truck existed in the first place. Now put that idea somewhere like Bethel, Alaska. Bethel has only around 16 miles of local road and is not connected to the rest of Alaska through the regular road network. The state has even studied road dust from busy unpaved roads in the community. In a place like that, ground clearance is not a decorative number sitting in a brochure. It can actually matter. So today on VHCar, we are answering a surprisingly complicated question. What actually happens when you lower a pickup truck? Not just what happens visually. We are talking about suspension geometry, ground clearance, tires, steering, towing, payload, ride quality, handling, fuel economy, maintenance, and what happens when your beautiful lowered truck meets the first pothole that did not receive the memo about your new suspension. And there is an important distinction here. A professionally designed lowering system is completely different from someone cutting springs in a garage because a video online made it look easy. One can create a genuinely well-sorted street truck. The other can transform your suspension into a collection of expensive metal parts arguing with each other. Before we start, tell us in the comments, would you ever lower a pickup? And if you already own a lowered F-150, Silverado, Ram, Tacoma, Colorado, or any other truck, tell us what you changed and whether you would do it again. Number 6. You immediately sacrifice ground clearance. This is the obvious one, but its consequences are bigger than most people think. Suppose you own a Chevrolet Silverado that originally sits high enough to comfortably clear curbs, rough dirt roads, construction entrances, snow buildup, and moderately uneven terrain. Now install a 3 or 4 inch drop. The body looks dramatically better if you like street truck styling. The wheel gap shrinks. The truck looks wider. The stance becomes more aggressive. Suddenly, it appears less like something designed to carry lumber and more like something that should be photographed outside a custom wheel shop at midnight. But the pavement is now several inches closer to everything underneath the truck. That includes suspension components, exhaust sections, cross members, bumpers, aerodynamic pieces, and depending on the truck, other hardware beneath the chassis. And this is where our imaginary owner in Bethel begins regretting his decisions. On a perfectly smooth street in Phoenix or Miami, a low Silverado might work beautifully. On a rough gravel road filled with depressions, ruts, and raised sections, every change in surface becomes something you have to think about. A stock pickup driver sees a large dip and keeps driving. A heavily lowered pickup driver sees the same dip and begins doing geometry calculations in his head. Can I enter diagonally? Is the exhaust going to touch? Did I just hear plastic? What was that noise? That last question becomes very popular among modified car owners. And ground clearance is only part of the problem. Lowering also changes approach, breakover, and departure behavior. In simple terms, a truck that previously moved over uneven terrain without touching the ground becomes more likely to scrape its front, center, or rear. This is why location matters enormously. If you own a 2-wheel drive F-150 in South Florida and use it almost exclusively on paved roads, lowering it might barely affect your actual lifestyle. If you own a Tacoma because you regularly drive dirt roads, lowering it may be the automotive equivalent of buying waterproof boots and drilling holes in the bottom. Number 5. Your suspension geometry changes. This is where lowering stops being cosmetic and starts becoming engineering. Your suspension was designed to operate through a certain range of motion. Control arms, tie rods, ball joints, springs, dampers, bushings, steering components, and wheel alignment all interact at specific angles. When you lower the chassis, those relationships change. That does not automatically mean something bad happens. Good lowering kits are designed specifically to control these changes. They may use different springs, shocks, control arms, spindles, relocation brackets, or other components to keep the suspension operating properly. But a poorly designed drop can introduce alignment problems. Camber can move away from its ideal range. Toe can change. Steering geometry can become less favorable. Tires may no longer sit against the road exactly the way the manufacturer intended. And the first thing many owners notice is not some dramatic suspension failure. It is tire wear. You install a beautiful set of 22-inch wheels. You lower the truck. You stand back and think, this is perfect. 5,000 miles later, the outside of the tire still looks excellent, while the inside edge appears to have spent 6 months being attacked with sandpaper. That is why a proper alignment after suspension modification is not an optional luxury. And sometimes an alignment alone cannot completely correct the geometry. Depending on how aggressive the drop is, additional components may be required. This is also where cheap modifications become expensive. The owner says, the lowering springs were only $300. Then comes the alignment. Then control arms. Then new tires. Then different shocks. Then something begins rubbing, then another appointment. Congratulations! Your $300 modification has developed a career. This leads directly into our first CTA. If you enjoy videos where we explain what modifications actually do, instead of simply saying they look cool, subscribe to VHCar and hit the like button. Because the automotive aftermarket contains some genuinely brilliant engineering, and some products that appear to have been designed during someone's lunch break. Number 4. You lose suspension travel. This may be the single biggest difference between a lowered car and a lowered pickup. A pickup often starts with substantial suspension travel because the vehicle is expected to deal with loads and uneven surfaces. When you reduce ride height, you reduce some of the physical space available for the suspension to move upward before components reach their limits. That means the suspension can reach the bump stop sooner. And once that happens, the ride can become dramatically harsher. Imagine driving a stock Ram 1500 over a large highway expansion joint. The suspension compresses, the shock controls the movement, and the body settles. Now imagine the same truck heavily lowered with insufficient travel. The wheel moves upward, the suspension compresses, and suddenly, bang! The remaining travel disappears. That is what people mean when they describe some poorly lowered vehicles as riding on the bump stops. The truck may look incredible while parked, but trucks are occasionally expected to move. A properly engineered lowering system attempts to preserve usable travel through shorter dampers, revised bump stops, different mounting points, drop spindles, airbags, or other solutions. This is also why air suspension has become so attractive in custom pickup builds. A well-designed air setup can allow a truck to sit extremely low while parked and raise itself when additional clearance is needed. Visually, you get the dramatic stance. Practically, you gain adjustment. But air systems introduce compressors, air lines, valves, electronic controls, tanks, fittings, and additional points that require correct installation and maintenance. There is no free lunch, especially not in automotive modification. Number 3. Towing and hauling become more complicated. This is where a lowered pickup can create consequences that owners do not always consider. Put weight in the bed of a truck and the rear suspension compresses. Attach a trailer, and tongue weight adds additional load to the rear. A stock truck is designed with enough suspension travel to accommodate this movement within its rated operating conditions. Now lower the rear suspension significantly. You have reduced some of that available travel before. The truck even receives a load. Imagine a lowered Ford F-150 with an empty bed. It sits perfectly. The wheel gap is exactly right. The stance looks incredible. Then the owner attaches a heavy trailer. The rear settles farther. Now the truck may sit much closer to its bump stops. the front may feel lighter. Headlight aim can change. Suspension movement can become more limited, and suddenly, the modification that looked perfect in a parking lot becomes far more complicated at highway. Speed. This does not mean lowered trucks cannot tow. They absolutely can when the suspension is correctly designed for the intended load. Some street truck owners use helper airbags, load support systems, appropriate springs, or carefully designed suspension packages specifically so the vehicle can remain low without giving up all of its useful capacity. But you cannot simply assume the original towing behavior remains unchanged after significantly altering the suspension. And this is an important distinction. Lowering the truck does not magically erase the manufacturer's structural engineering, but modifying suspension components can change how comfortably and safely the truck manages weight. If towing matters to you, the suspension should be chosen around that requirement from the beginning. Do not build the truck first and remember the boat afterward. That is how expensive creativity happens. Number 2, the truck may actually handle better if you do it correctly. Finally, something positive. Lowering a pickup reduces its center of gravity. That can reduce body roll and make the truck feel more planted during changes of direction. Pair the lower ride height with properly matched dampers, springs, quality tires, corrected alignment, and sensible wheel sizes, and a street-focused pickup can feel dramatically sharper than stock. This is where a lowered truck begins making sense. Imagine a rear-wheel drive F-150 or Silverado that spends virtually its entire life on pavement. The owner does not tow heavy trailers. He does not drive rocky trails. He wants something comfortable enough for daily use, but much more responsive on the road. Why maintain 8 or 9 inches of ground clearance you never use? A moderate drop can transform the visual proportions and driving character of the truck. The steering may feel more immediate. Body movement can decrease. Highway stability can improve. The truck feels less like it is sitting above the road and more like it is connected to it. But here is the irony. Lowering alone does not automatically improve handling. A bad suspension setup can make the truck worse. If the dampers do not match the springs, if suspension travel disappears, if alignment is incorrect, or if massive heavy wheels are installed purely for appearance, you may end up with a lower truck that handles worse than the original. The center of gravity went down. Everything else went to court. This is why serious street truck builds treat the suspension as a complete system, rather than a collection of parts purchased independently because each one had good reviews. And now our second CTA, what would you choose? A completely stock truck with maximum practicality, a mild 2-inch street drop, or a fully slammed air suspension build? Put your choice in the comments because I suspect this one is going to divide truck owners almost perfectly in half. And number 1, you completely change what the pickup is good at. This is the real answer to the entire video. Lowering a pickup does not simply make it lower. It changes its purpose. Take something like a Toyota Tacoma. In stock form, especially in an off-road oriented configuration, the Tacoma is designed around clearance, uneven surfaces, suspension movement, and terrain capability. Lower it aggressively and install large street wheels with low-profile tires. It may look fantastic, but now the features that made the Tacoma useful off-road matter far less because the new suspension and wheel setup discourage you from using them. The truck has become a street machine, and there is nothing inherently wrong with that. The mistake is pretending there was no trade-off. Go back to Bethel. If you actually lived somewhere with rough and unpaved roads, a lowered pickup would force you to slow down. Choose your path carefully and protect parts that a stock height truck could carry over the same terrain with far less drama. Meanwhile, take that exact lowered truck to a smooth urban boulevard, and suddenly the modification makes much more sense. This is why the endless internet argument about whether lowering pickups is stupid completely misses the point. The real question is, what do you need the truck to do? If you bought your F-150 to pull equipment across rough property, lowering it dramatically probably makes little sense. If you bought your Silverado because you love custom street trucks and it never leaves pavement, the factory ride height may be giving you capability you do not need. If you tow frequently, you need to design around load support. If you drive rough roads, preserve clearance. If you care about handling, use a complete suspension system. If your goal is simply to park at a show with the frame almost touching the pavement, air suspension may be exactly what you want. There is no universal correct height. There is only the correct height for how the truck is actually used. And there is one more consequence people forget. Modifications can affect resale. A professionally built lowered truck may be extremely attractive to the right buyer, but the buyer pool becomes smaller. A stock Silverado appeals to almost anyone shopping for a Silverado. A Silverado sitting 5 inches lower on 24-inch wheels appeals to someone looking specifically for a Silverado sitting 5 inches lower on 24-inch wheels. You have gone from selling a truck to finding your automotive soulmate. So what actually happens when you lower a pickup? You lose ground clearance. You change suspension geometry. You reduce available suspension travel. You complicate towing and hauling. You may improve street handling. And most importantly, you transform the mission of the vehicle. A mild, properly engineered drop can create a fantastic street truck without destroying everyday usability. An extreme drop can create an incredible show truck. And a cheap, badly planned drop can create a machine that scrapes everywhere, destroys tires, rides terribly, and makes you intimately familiar with every pothole in your city. The parts are not the problem, the plan is. And that brings us to our third and final CTA. If you own a lowered pickup, tell us exactly what truck you have, how much you lowered it, what suspension you used, and the biggest thing nobody warned you about before you modified it. Your experience may save another viewer a lot of money. Subscribe to VHCar for more breakdowns of modifications, engineering, trucks, sports cars, ownership mistakes, and the things that actually happen after you install the parts everyone on the internet told you to buy. Because lowering a pickup can make it look better. It can make it handle better. It can even make it more enjoyable. But if you live somewhere where the road occasionally disappears underneath you, you may suddenly discover why the manufacturer put the truck that high in the first place.